Thank you, Sally. And as I can reiterate what Sally says, a very warm welcome to you all. And as Rose and Joan have just put into the chat books, yes, it's the 5th day already. It's our grand finale. And I promise this isn't just a series of events for you two. We actually have over 3,000 people who've joined us during the course of the week. And we're expecting at least 300 who've registered for this, who will either be watching live or be watching it again as a catch-up. So thanks ever so for your participation as participants. But also I'd like to extend a big thanks to both Faithful+Gould and the UKRI Healthy Aging Challenge for sponsoring this particular session, and indeed the whole week. This session in particular is called Sustainable Retirement Living, a Climate for Change from Sustainability and Retrofit to Current Market Conditions. And indeed, it builds on some of the things that we looked at yesterday around designing for health wellbeing. If you joined us for the PRP session, we looked very much from a holistic perspective about what the impact of various changes to the way we build, design our homes and our communities, both in terms of new, but also now today, much more around the sort of retrofit and sustainability area. So again, I'm really excited to see this session. In terms of those of you who want to know about how we maintain and support our annual summit, we're supported generously by a series of headline sponsors and associate sponsors. And I've already given a big shout and big thumbs up to Faithful+Gould and UKRI Healthy Aging Challenge. But our other headline sponsors are the Guinness Partnership, Tunstall, Lovell Later Living, who will be presenting this afternoon, Extra Care Charitable Trust, Housing 21, Invisible Creations, Johnny Johnson, ProCare Limited, PRP and Shakespeare Martineau. So a big thanks to all you, Sue and George in particular today, for this excellent session that we're about to hear. For those of you expecting Lord Best to chair this morning's session, I'm afraid he wasn't able to make it in the end, not because of illness or other commitments in terms of personal commitments, but actually Parliament is sitting today and he has been asked urgently to lead a House of Lords debate on supported housing regulation and quality, a bill that some of you will know that Bob Blackman is leading through the House of Commons. Lord Best is doing that this morning through the House of Lords. So unfortunately, he won't be with us. So I've stepped in at short notice to chair this morning's session. And it's a session in two halves. The first part is with Faithful+Gould, and we're joined by Annabelle Thorne, Peter Dunn and Susan Rugg, or Sue Rugg as I know her. They're all regional directors at Faithful+Gould. I know that it looks like that Annabelle and Peter are in the same office. I think I know they're in the same office, and they're in different regions. And we're going to hear from them at first, and then they'll be followed by George McGuinness, the Challenge Director at the UKRI Healthy Aging Challenge, a really fascinating program that was really trying to put 5 years extra into everybody's life. And he'll be followed by Adam Fitzgerald, who's the program manager of Building Better Lives for Housing at Dorset Council. And if you haven't already spotted, we launched and published a case study on his work, which he'll be walking through later this morning. So without further ado, I'm actually going to hand over to Susan Rugg, who's just going to give a brief overview about the work of Faithful+Gould. She'll be back with us shortly after Annabelle and Peter as well. But Sue, over to you. Thanks very much for your support.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Yeah, look forward to doing the presentation today. Like Jeremy said, I'm Sue Rugg, a Regional Director at Faithful+Gould, and we're going to be presenting today about Sustainable Retirement Living, a Climate for Change. We've got 3 presenters from Faithful+Gould. To introduce myself, I run a national team delivering care and extra care for residential schemes across the country, working with organisations like HousingLIN to drive the agenda for change for supported housing and housing for the elderly. I'll pass over to Annabelle and Peter to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Sue. My name is Annabelle Thorne. As I've just been introduced, I'm a Regional Director in our Faithful+Gould business, a project and programme management consultancy, and my role is leading on sustainability for the business. Within that, looking at our internal change of making sure that within traditional construction roles, we embed sustainability into all of our mandates, and also working with a huge range of residential clients to drive the sustainable agenda forward.
And good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Dunn. I'm also a regional director here in London in our consult team. My focus over the last 5 years has been looking at net zero carbon retrofit sort of measures, and now heavily involved in our sort of decarbonomics platform. So I'm looking forward to sort of explaining about sort of some of the things that we see and what we're trying to do with it. Back to you, Sue.
Thank you very much, Peter. If I can ask you to move on to the next slide. Thank you. So to start the presentation, we're just going to do a very small section on Faithful+Gould. I'm not going to take a lot of time up because I want to really let Peter and Annabelle dig deeper into the sustainability offering that we are doing. Faithful+Gould, well, we're a world-leading integrated project and program management consultancy working with both public and private clients. We have about 1,600 professionals across the 26 offices, delivering both to local clients and national clients. Myself and Faithful+Gould, we've been working with HousingLIN for over 10 years now, extremely passionate about this sector. And one of the things that we do is encourage all our employees to become dementia friends using some of our in-house dementia champions. So that's a very brief overview of Faithful+Gould. What do we do here? If you've never heard of us, I've put together this slide of some of the services that we offer for our clients. Pointing out some of the obvious ones, well, cost and commercial management, quantity surveying services, building surveying, health and safety, project management. Moving on to some of the services that we are going to discuss today around the retrofit services, obviously a very keen topic, and our sustainability consulting lifecycle cost planning. In terms of experience within the care and extra care market. Thank you. Well, provided a very small selection of schemes that we've worked on in the past. Here are some of our new build schemes, as you can see, ranging from large schemes to slightly smaller schemes. We also do refurbishment schemes, offering a lot of our core services, cost planning, looking at design briefs for clients, project management, and health and safety services. Like I said, that is just a pure whistle-stop tour of Faithful+Gould, and these slides will be available, as Jeremy said, on the website at the end. I'm going to pass over now to Annabelle to talk in a bit more detail about the main topic of our presentation.
Brilliant, thanks, Sue. So we thought we'd start today with an overview of what is sustainability. We so often use the terms sustainability, net zero carbon, biodiversity, kind of interchangeably as positive metrics around projects. But what is sustainability? So in 1987, the United Nations Brundtland Commission defined sustainability as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And that is really beautifully captured by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So these 17 colourful tiles that you can see on the slide in front of you captured what still is an urgent call for action by all countries, developed and developing, in a global partnership to work together to recognise the need to end poverty and other deprivations, look at strategies to improve health and well-being, education, reduce inequality and spur economic growth. All, of course, while tackling climate change and working to preserve our biodiversity and ecology, so our oceans and our forests. You might well recognise these colourful tiles as they're used in a huge number of organisational reports when talking around sustainability. Now, all of these United Nations Sustainable Development Goals were adopted by UN member states in 2015 as part of our 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Obviously, 2030 is now just under 7 years away, so a really short amount of time left to achieve that global action that's required. A goal that you're probably even more familiar with is the net zero carbon targets, which we're legally required to achieve in the UK by 2050. But a huge amount of organisations, and again, I'm sure many of you on this call work for organisations that have committed to net zero carbon by 2030, maybe 2035, 2040. So a huge challenge that we have to work on together. As one of those current targets is working on reducing our carbon emissions to reduce the impacts of global warming. As we're going to come on to some of our software later that helps to decarbonise, I just wanted to start with kind of that basic understanding, make sure that everyone's familiar with the terms Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3, and operational and embodied carbon. So starting first with the Scope 1, 2 and 3, this comes from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and splits out the organisational reporting of carbon. So Scope 1 is our direct greenhouse gas emissions for an organisation, principally the result of activities such as the generation of electricity and steam under direct control. Scope 2 is the indirect electricity greenhouse gas emissions that companies must report on. And Scope 3 is the other indirect greenhouse gas emissions that companies are looking at. Now, when we take that from kind of we've gone from a global level there to an organisational level. If we come down to a project level, we then need to understand on each project what the embodied and operational carbon is to make up the whole life carbon. So our embodied carbon refers to the emissions associated with the materials and construction processes throughout the whole life cycle of an asset, while the operational carbon refers to the emissions produced during the operational use of an asset. So an example of that is the electricity, gas or oil, the fuels that are used in a building for heating, cooling and power. Add those two together and you come up with your whole life carbon emissions for a project. Now, while we need to look definitely at new build and making sure that across all of our development, we're developing to net zero carbon and incorporating holistic sustainability, one of the biggest challenges that we have at the moment is retrofitting. So 40% of carbon comes from the construction industry and from the buildings that we own and operate, and 80% of the buildings that will exist in 2050, so the date by which net zero carbon, we must achieve that in the UK, 80% of the buildings that will exist then already exist today. So a huge challenge we have on our hands to make sure that we retrofit appropriately. Now, the key drivers for those retrofit measures come in many forms. We're looking at reducing carbon emissions, obviously as much as possible, but also looking at the other benefits that sit alongside that. So delivering warm and energy efficient homes that people want to buy, they want to live in, and they contribute to good health, as was covered yesterday, as Jeremy pointed out on the health and wellbeing webinar. Looking at tackling fuel poverty, supporting green jobs, developing the retrofit sector further, and overall improving the comfort and health and well-being of tenants in social housing buildings, but also in the wider residential environment. And I'm going to pass over to Peter now to run you through how we would look at retrofitting a project.
Thank you, Annabelle. So we've over a number of years been helping and supporting clients with their net zero carbon targets and helping them understand their sort of roadmaps to achieve that. And we're in a fortunate place that we've got a lot of expertise across the different sort of professions that you need to be able to do that. And we've over the last few years put a lot of time and effort into trying to help accelerate our clients' various challenges to sort of get to a point that they can help look at their net zero carbon roadmaps and understand with meaningful sort of inputs how they would approach that. So Decarbonomics is a platform that we've developed, and I'll come to a dashboard in a second. But it's a 3-step process where we look at the benchmarking, roadmap, and deliver, and I'll go into what those steps mean in a minute. Behind this is a lot of data that we've captured and pulled from various key industry data sort of points, but also with our own in-house information. And we've used our own sort of engineers and data scientists, QSs, PMs, whole life carbon experts and architects, etc., to really sort of help provide something that is meaningful, that allows you to get to a point that you can start really bespoking outputs that help organise, really understand what their roadmap is, not something that's reasonably generic, to really support how they can sort of prioritize certain interventions, and we'll go into some of those in a minute, but also how they can look at making sure they protect their residents' sort of journey as well, because this could be a hugely disruptive exercise, and we want to make sure that we're sort of getting the right meaningful information to support the campaign of net zero carbon investments that's needed. So I'm going to up to the platform. Give me 1 second. Does that come up? The benefit of being in an office, so I can look at check that about. Yep. Okay, great. So we've got three. So firstly, there's 3 stages to decarbonomics. There's the benchmark stage, and the benchmark stage is all about understanding where your operational carbon is. So a lot of the challenges we see with organisations is when they've got a large estate and they're trying to understand their operational carbon, they don't have a lot of data. There's prohibitive measures to get that data in terms of the costs and time it takes to survey all their buildings. It also means that they don't know necessarily which buildings are worse, which buildings are performing better, how these buildings relate to the EPC requirements that are coming into legislation that are sort of changing the need to improve our buildings. So what we've done is we've built Benchmark, and it looks at all the buildings within a portfolio. And as you can see on the right hand side, it starts looking at the sort of operational carbon being generated from each building. And you can start quickly seeing from an operational carbon which ones are your worst performing. It then looks at a lot of sort of key metrics as we sort of need. So the EPC ratings I mentioned, energy use intensity. Energy use intensity is about taking operational carbon and making it relevant to the size of the building. So you can start seeing a building that's got a high operational carbon might actually be very efficient. It's just that it's a very big building. So it starts giving you that context. Starts looking at your operational carbon production and your average carbon emissions each year. And also starts articulating your utility costs. So for landlords with large estates, you can start sort of seeing which buildings you've got sort of higher utility bills, and starting to sort of see the correlations between the interventions that come in the roadmap. We also look at the EPC rating, and this graph here allows you to start looking at where you've got high energy use intensity and where that is in certain EPC ratings. So some of our clients are really starting to look at, okay, which buildings are in EPC bands D+, how does that, how much carbon is caught up in those buildings, and how do we start sort of targeting those as a priority to help get ourselves ready for legislation changes, but also benefiting from the the carbon reductions that will come. So again, lots of good sort of insights, really getting to understand your estates, and this is starting to really help organisations get to an informed decision. You can look at it from a top carbon production. So I'll just let this load 1 sec. So top 10 carbon emitters are coming from these buildings. You can start seeing your energy usage across those buildings, so you can start really understanding that. And again, this is starting to just bring an amazing amount. Most clients understand their estate pretty well, but they don't have the data to sort of really determine where they are. So this is starting to really help that sort of journey. The other area I thought would be quite interesting to touch on is tenure. So a lot around landlord spaces and sort of your residents, and understanding where there's leases within buildings, but also if whole buildings be taken as a sublease. And again, you can start looking at where the operational carbon is locked up in terms of your lease profile, which again is hugely valuable, because you can start seeing if you've got risk to your portfolio when those leases become free, and you've got an EPC challenge and you've got a net zero carbon challenge. It's starting to allow organisations to understand their risk portfolio. So hugely valuable sort of information. And then the other one I thought would be really interesting for people with sort of dispersion or an estate sort of spread around, particularly local authorities, etc., is you can start looking at the climate risk as well. So again, we use our sort of climate risk teams to sort of look at the various things. So we've got a few examples here. So cold vulnerability, heat vulnerability, water scarcity. There's obviously floodplains, etc. You can also roll in, but this is again just a sort of dummy dashboard. So you can start looking, okay, which buildings have got sort of water scarcity you need to be concerned about for, for the future, heat vulnerability as well. London's obviously a bit of a worry but so it gives you again this sort of extra lens, which is also coming into the sustainability driver, and will really start becoming more and more loud as we go through the stages here. So then you go to roadmap, and roadmap is, so you've got the understanding of the data, and where we don't have survey data and information, we pull it from our carbon data insights, which is proxy data that then gives you that full estate view. It then, using algorithms and the modeling that our various teams have done, it produces a roadmap for you. The roadmap shows you, if you don't do anything, the business as usual change, because the grid's going to decarbonise at current trajectory, what the impact will be. Then it also uses these sort of various algorithms in the background to look at, if you're prioritising carbon into saving, what the speed and your trajectory looks like. If you're targeting operational costs, then what that trajectory looks like, and then an optimum between the two where you're sort of getting your best return on investment. It also starts giving you quite quickly the capital costs and utilities saving and the information that you need to start building for the business case to sort of start supporting your net zero carbon roadmap. And it also looks at your marginal abatement cost curve. So where do you need to spend your money to get the most benefit on carbon savings? And the sort of interventions we're typically looking at for retrofit solutions start with sort of fabric first, and that's looking at improving the performance of the building from insulation, walls, windows, roofs, etc. So you're starting to reduce the load of heat requirements and cooling requirements on the actual existing building. Then you're looking at a number of other interventions, which can be lighter touch, LEDs, that sort of thing. Then we're looking at BMS, better, so you're getting better controls, better information from systems. You're also then looking at things like HVAC improvements, and then more impactful sort of interventions like heat decarbonisation. We also look at sort of renewables and particularly PVs, which have got a large uptake, and how they benefit. But I think there's also a huge amount of behavioural changes you can do as well. Certainly where we talk to universities and where you've got student living, changing models around how rentals and sort of those sort of activities, so you start getting people to actually thinking, well, if I change my behaviour, there's going to be some benefit in my rental, or how the building's performing, etc. So there's lots of those sort of more softer interventions that can have a huge impact. We also, there's green leases that are sort of being more and more coined, and how they can start sort of passing mutual benefits and sort of targets between landlord and lease tenants. And then we're also sort of seeing all these things need to be considered as a change. It's a change program, because you can't just go in and do these things. You need to really think about how they affect the occupants, how you message it, how you demonstrate the benefits of it, and how it's going to sort of ultimately benefit them in the longer term, etc. So there's a lot of work we sort of do to try and help organisations understand sort of that approach. And so this is and I'll just quickly cut to a couple of views on here. And so here, if you want to look at various information around these interventions I just mentioned, you've got heating here. You can quickly see sort of all the capital costs associated with that. And you can start seeing, if I just wanted to do wall insulation across my estate, what would that be? I mean, we start looking at across the profile of the sort of target you're trying to decarbonise by. So again, there's a huge amount of this information that's starting to create good insights and support our clients. And then the final stage of decarbonomics is deliver. And again, there's flexibility around all of this. And we also change a number of the outputs to support our clients' particular needs. But in deliver stage is taking, so you've done the benchmark, you've got some sort of, again, you're not having to survey all your estate, you're sort of surveying a smaller percentage to get a good understanding of it. That's then informing a really sort of robust roadmap, which we then use our various professions and the clients' teams to sort of get to a really sort of clean and bespoke roadmap that's clear, that's also considering other programs like critical life maintenance work, etc. And then we're then taking that and turning that into packages of works that you can then use with your existing BEM providers, operators, or where it's more complicated work, many sort of tenders to contract that. We also look at sort of where you've got larger portfolios, how you can batch buy, things like PVs and things to get the economies of scale. But ultimately, the important thing about deliver stage is really understanding where you are. I mean, it's the process of this is very difficult. And what we do when we've worked with a number of larger organisations and local authorities, it's trying to understand actually where you are in terms of getting the data, getting access to the buildings, getting the feedback to support the design. So all of that sort of program effort really helps inform and support clients. And where there's also capital spend that's reviewed each year, you know, the challenges that happen each year of the sort of macroeconomics and how does that impact your net zero carbon journey. And again, having this sort of more automated allows you to quickly do that sort of benefit realization, sensitive analysis if you take buildings out, etc. So that's all then fed back into that roadmap stage, but then allows you to really sort of see a sort of dynamic roadmap developing that's showing how you're doing. So that's reasonably quickly an oversight of how the decarbonomics works. What I wanted to do then is just flip back to the presentation. Just give me 1 second. Let me just check that. And Annabelle's just going to touch on some of the key insights we're sort of seeing from working with a number of clients in the space.
Brilliant, thanks, Peter. So yeah, from running through this solution with quite a few of our clients, I think what we found is that, you know, there is a lack of data out there in the industry, and you've probably found the same if you've started on this journey. You know, everyone's kind of started at the same time. It means that as an industry, we've kind of got a responsibility to share knowledge and lessons learned across what we've seen so that we don't have to learn those lessons on every single project. I think one of the top ones that we've definitely found is that some of the technology that Peter just spoke about there, some of it probably more cutting edge than others. You know, a heat pump is probably a bigger change for some than putting in, say, LED lighting. But, you know, where we have those technologies being put in, we also need to make sure that landlords, residents, occupants of buildings understand how to maintain them. There is a large skills gap there, and we need to make sure that where we've got kind of engineering technical solutions, they are understandable to those that are then required to maintain and operate them. Part of that is looking at this sort of soft landings approach. So making sure that we've got consistency in delivered technology, clear understanding of how to maintain and update, you know, how long that asset should be in place for before being replaced, but also when it should be replaced, you know, coming back to that embodied carbon part, you know, making sure we're not replacing elemental assets too early because that carbon's already been expended in making that piece of technology. If I pick on just a couple of the others, I won't run through all of these because I understand these slides will be available afterwards. It's also really key to understand the impacts of each intervention. So if I take that intervention priority next, as part of decarbonisation and retrofit, it's always encouraged that we look at a whole building approach. And a good example of this is, for instance, if you were to choose renewable energy as one of your focused interventions, you pop PV panels up on your roof, but you haven't yet looked at a structural survey or understood the condition of your roof and the slates that sit underneath. It could well mean that you're having to peel those PV panels off the roof several years later to go through and do that repair strategy. So it's really important that the building has been properly assessed, so that we're not looking at interventions that then cause problems further down the line. Setting up for operational success is also absolutely key. Stakeholder engagement, obviously this will completely depend on the type of property or building that we're looking at. If it's your own private home, you can be your own stakeholder, understand the time in the programme. But if you are in a care home or a building that has a landlord and we have tenants or social housing, then of course there needs to be a huge programme of stakeholder engagement that's undertaken, so that all tenants understand the work that is about to be proposed and the impact that that will have. And I guess that is not to be underestimated in terms of the time length that takes. I guess in terms of positive stats, though, the Bayes commissioned report back in 2022 showed that with social housing tenants, with correct engagement, over 52% would never refuse that work, and of course would fully engage with that. But that is a big challenge that needs to be looked at. The next one that I'll touch on, and I'll come on to in more detail now, is accessing available funding. Obviously, it's all very well us going through and saying, this is what we must do from a retrofit perspective, but how on earth is this paid for? There are really short lead-in times for the funding that is available. And of course, here I'm only really talking about funding that's available for social housing in this particular aspect. So the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund is funding to improve the energy performance of social homes. The aim of this is to raise the energy performance of low EPC rated properties and move those, where they up to an EPC band C, to take homes out of fuel poverty and deliver progress towards that commitment we spoke about earlier. So the UK's commitment to be net zero by 2050. So in 2019, the Conservative manifesto committed to 3.8 billion of social housing decarbonisation funding over a 10-year period to improve the energy performance of social rented homes on that pathway to net zero. The Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund is out there to deliver warm, energy efficient homes, reduce carbon emissions and fuel bills, tackle fuel poverty and support green jobs. So very much answering to those key drivers that I spoke about earlier in the presentation. It supports the 10-point plan for the green industrial revolution and makes progress towards delivering the government's commitment and the responsibility, I guess, that we all have to get to that net zero point. The Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund started off with a demonstrator, which awarded around £62 million of funding as an initial investment to test innovative approaches to retrofitting at scale. That's been achieved, and that's currently being delivered with up to 20,000 social housing properties reducing bills and carbon emissions currently. Sorry, that was in the demonstrator. Then in wave one, we then had 20,000 homes. So 2,000 in the demonstrator, up to 20,000 homes then in wave one. And we've just had wave 2.1 has just been published and then undertaken. So in wave 2.1 guidance, timelines were published in July 2022. It was then launched in October 2022, closed for applications in November 2022, and we have until 2025 to deliver those grant applications. It allocated up to £800 million of funding to support the installation of energy performance measures in social homes. Now, those eligible organisations are listed there above, so local authorities, combined authorities, registered providers of social housing, and registered charities that own social housing. There is a huge amount that needs to go into these applications. And I guess this is another one of our absolute key lessons learned, is making sure that you have that strategy in place as early as possible to make sure that you can meet these lead-in times and understand the key criteria. So for instance, in wave 2.1, you needed a minimum of 100 eligible social housing homes to go forward for this. Bills need to not increase as a net result of all retrofit works. A fabric first approach must be taken. Of course, the post retrofit, so part of that kind of measurement and verification piece, the deliver piece that Peter was speaking about, needs to comply with all the performance outcomes. So in terms of a key case study, if you are a landlord or you are working within a residential estate, specifically for social housing, if you want to apply to the funding. But this is of course eligible to anyone who does have those residential properties. In terms of the decarbonisation plans, is making sure that you develop a roadmap to achieve energy efficiency and a step change to a net zero future as soon as possible, so that you're ready to submit that for the funding process, but equally, to get as much work done as early as possible. And the aim is to extend the life of the assets, improve living conditions for tenants, improve energy efficiency through fabric improvements, and ultimately reduce carbon emissions. So there's a couple of key messages, I think. So it's getting prepared, get to know the process, attend kind of training on Past 2035, which I'll come on to in just 1 second, get lessons learned from other housing providers. Make sure you have the right strategy in place and look at that first of all from a portfolio level so that you can prioritise the properties that you'll focus on in the Fabric First approach and looking at the decarbonisation measures. And then make sure you get the right partner on board. As part of these decarbonisation projects, there are a huge amount of new roles and responsibilities that have been introduced. So Past 2035 is a British standard that creates a recognisable quality for the retrofit and energy efficiency sector for housing. All projects that are funded by the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund that I mentioned above, the local authority delivery schemes or the home upgrade grants are required to comply with that standard. And it aims to ensure that retrofit projects deliver their intended outcomes at the right cost. Within those teams, that means that we now have new roles. So roles such as a retrofit coordinator, retrofit assessor, retrofit designer, installer, and evaluator. And the role that really stands out in this is the retrofit coordinator. So Past 2035 requires that all domestic retrofit projects incorporate a retrofit coordinator into those projects. Now, this person's job is to oversee the management and design of all retrofit measures. And to carry out that role, it's necessary for the coordinator to attain specific certification around coordination and risk management. And their role will then be to run through the, I would call it a simple process. It's quite a long process, the Past 2035 process, but kind of simplified down into 6 key steps from a pretty lengthy document, which are to look at the intended outcomes of your retrofit, understand the risk assessment, look at a whole dwelling assessment, look at design and coordination across that retrofit, look at the installation of the interventions, and then look at monitoring and evaluation in order to measure its success and provide key learning opportunities. So down the right-hand side, in kind of a typical project that we might work on, the kind of key items that we look at in terms of those workshops to establish key drivers, site surveys, looking at that stakeholder engagement being absolutely key, delivering the retrofit, and then measurement and verification is all formed within that 6-stage process. What I will do now is I will pass over to Sue to run us through what we're seeing in terms of market insights at the moment. Sue, sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry, I thought I'd click that. And so this is kind of our second part of our presentation. And I've been talking to Jeremy about this for quite a long time. And it's kind of how we've been feeling over the last few years. Hopefully this slide kind of sort of title it correctly, 2 years of mayhem. We've seen lots of stuff going on over the last few years since 2020. And I thought this was quite an aptly named slide. So this slide is showing a very interesting line graph. And you might actually think, what is it showing? It's got no axis or anything like that. This is showing a common pattern of what's been happening over the last couple of years to metrics that we've been following, such as the construction output, material index, inflation. They all follow this very similar pattern. Scales and times may differ, but the pattern appears to be consistent. The good news is that it appears that the line is sort of slowly going down, moving downwards, but hopefully when I talk through the next 2 things, we can demonstrate that over there. So on to the next slide is about construction output. We've taken this data from January 2021. So not really including 2020 as the year of COVID, where everything went a bit crazy. The line, it shows the output has grown by at least 30%. That's the dark blue line. Yet, if we look at this in a bit more detail, you'll see that this is slightly misleading, as if you strip away inflation, the volume has only increased by a region of about 20%, 12%. So we all ask, what are the main contributions to this increase? Firstly, let's look at the material price increases. Sorry, this is the problem about sitting in different offices. Peter, if you can move on to the next slide. Thank you. Material price increases. This graph we've started from 2016, the year that Brexit was announced. And as you can see, it's slowly been going up. Since this period, the material prices have increased by 60% across the UK. Where if we compare this to Netherlands, they've only actually seen an increase of 35%. What do we know about the main contributors to this and where the jumps are in the graph? We know about lockdown. We've got the ongoing Ukraine war, and actually when Brexit happened and the weak pound. So why has this had a bigger impact on the UK? This has been as a result of the UK having to import materials instead of manufacturing on home soil, such as M&E, curtain walling, etc. To finish on materials, the good news story, we've been seeing that materials prices are actually going back down to 2009 levels, which is great news for us all. Next slide. So how has the build cost increased then, if we have well been talking about material prices increases, but we've also been seeing a labour shortage across the UK. This has been a contributing factor in the higher construction costs, with skilled workers moving down the road for more money and forcing the tenders to keep on rising and rising. But this has all become a result of forcing the tenders to keep going up. As a result of this and having to keep on winning work, contractors have had to look at restraining their costs by cutting their margins and maybe changing suppliers. But with material costs increasing and labour costs increasing, delays on site, that has all come at a cost to the industry. The next slide is going to show that impact on the supply chain. So we are record number of insolvencies within the industry so far. We're actually back at 2008 levels, which is hard to believe. If you look at the green, light green turquoise kind of section of the graph, you'll see that this has been getting bigger and bigger, and this is the insolvencies within specialist construction activities such as M&E. That is a concern. So why is this? Well, in the UK, we have a lot of fixed price contracts, which have been affected by, as we've talked about, the cost of materials, delays on site, such as the COVID factor, and also delays to the materials coming into the UK. We've had an increase in finance costs, which we all appreciate. And finally, the supply chain itself. So that supply chain from the main contractor and how they fix their prices have all had a knock-on effect on why our construction costs have increased in the UK. And finally, the last slide, we're going to look at the tender price forecast. The last couple of years have been a tough market for us all. 2021, we saw a 6% TPI. 2022, an average of 8.5% TPI, which has all been a difficult market to gain tenders. However, we are predicting from 2023 a more stable market with tender prices increasing, but going back down to our traditional rates towards the middle of the year. Hopefully this downturn will lead to more price stability and a keener tender market. This is just a brief snapshot of what Faithful+Gould produce. We produce quarterly reports called Construction Intelligence Reports. A more detailed version of what I've just been talking about will be available on the Faithful+Gould website in mid-March. And that is the end of our presentation. I hope you found it interesting, and I'm going to pass back over to Jeremy.
Well, thank you, Sue, Annabelle and Peter. Real fascinating presentation. I must confess, I'm not somebody who gets moved by these sort of things. But actually, I found your presentation really interesting, and I know that the conversations we've had, Sue, you've described the real life situation that's out there. And I know there are other elements around the workforce, you know, and issues that we really need to think about as a sector. But well, I know there are a few questions. I'll encourage you not to answer them now. We'll come back to those when we do the final Q&A and panel debate. But also, your presentation is a great segue to George, both because the UKRI also have a construction, transforming construction challenge, and picking up a lot of those points that you have. But George also is the director of the Healthy Aging Challenge, and thinking about how what you've described also has an impact on how we think about our longevity, and not just the longevity of the assets we have, but also us as people in those assets as well. And George is going to share with us the work of the UKRI's Healthy Aging Challenge and some of the interventions that they've been funding, which are sort of allied to some of the things that you've already described. And this will make a really good conversation piece later as well. So George, I'm going to hand over to you, and thank you for your support as well for this session.
Yeah, Jeremy, thank you very much. And you're absolutely right. So 3 pillars of sustainable living, really. So we're moving from environmental sustainability to sustainable communities, but also with economic sustainability in mind for those innovators. So you asked me to showcase a selection of our projects from across the UK. I suppose before I start, it's really humbling to see so many people on this call and to hear how many people have dialed in throughout the week. And I think that's a real tribute to the work of you and your team in the HousingLIN in catalysing this sector. So first, a little context. So the Healthy Aging Challenge that I have been leading is a £98 million investment in research and innovation, guided by this overall intention to allow people to remain active, productive, independent, and socially connected across the generations for as long as possible. And of course, before we set off, no one expected COVID-19 and the graphs that we've just seen. But the pandemic has not only highlighted the value of arriving in later life in good health, it's also surfaced what I think are new issues that create fresh opportunities for innovation in housing and communities. So questions about how and where we care for people in later life, and accelerating changes on the high street and the fabric of our communities, which has implications also for where and how we live. So when we set off, we were guided by 7 broad themes that together contribute towards aging well, and they're illustrated here. The themes cover intrinsic factors like staying healthy and active, as well as those wider external factors, such as the role of the built environment. And it should be no surprise to you that housing and the design of our communities plays a really key part in this. What to me was a really pleasant surprise was that, given that projects in the built environment are typically expensive and take a long time, how much of the innovation investment that we have seen has been in housing. And that doesn't also count a host of innovations that aim to support people living independently for longer in their own homes. So before I highlight some of the projects, it's probably just helpful to frame the range of investments involved, which form part of what we see as a pipeline of innovations from research through to spin out and scale up. So those sort of 3 central segments are what I'm talking about. So we've got research, we've got researchers developing ideas to spin out of universities, pretty conventional innovation. We've got a whole load of stuff that is pretty, again, conventional Innovate UK business. And what's also been exciting is being able to work with people really very close to market on scaling up some ideas. And I'll give you some of those examples. So enough background. Let's look at some examples, starting purely with housing, and I'll work through from left to right, which is actually from early stage through to our scale up. So I always have trouble pronouncing this word. DESCA, or Designing Homes for Healthy Cognitive Aging, is one of our research projects, this one at Stirling University, identifying scalable and sustainable design improvements to homes for cognitive aging. And they're working with businesses such as IKEA, but also one of our other partners, Blackwood Homes and Care, to inform future dementia-friendly designs of homes. Moving slightly on and slipping slightly further south, Flexible Living to Age in Place is a Catalyst research spin-out project, actually coming from Northumbria, and is exploring how adaptable and technology-enabled homes can help older people stay living independently longer within their community. This particular project has actually been working with a new development in South Seaham, so they're trying to embed some of the designs they're doing in the new design of sort of a new village, again in the northeast. And they're one of several architectural projects that we've seen. Another one from an organisation called Rural Design, which is a social venture, is working on low-cost, energy-efficient modular terraced housing for older residents of rural areas. And building with modern methods of construction was the subject, as Jeremy's just mentioned, of another Industrial Challenge Fund investment. So it's great to see it popping up here, and again in the next presentation from Dorset. So next we come to the first of 3 of our Scale Up Trailblazer projects, and they're the larger projects taking things to scale. In fact, the fact that 3 of 5 are housing focused, I think, again, just reinforces the point that I'm saying. So the first one, E.ON's Homes for Living project, is an extension to their energy efficiency work and is developing a service providing attractive and affordable home adaptations to enable people to age in place for longer. And they've been working with innovative designers, and I noticed that Invisible Creations are one of the co-sponsors of this week, helping to turn adaptations like grab rails into something people would really want in their home. So I didn't get the grab rail, but I did get the toilet roll holder that actually also doubles as a handrail. So that gives you the sort of idea. Moving up a scale, London Rebuilding's Healthy Homes, Healthy Lives project is developing a turnkey service for large-scale home improvements supported by new financial products. So what they do is they work to design and deliver for homeowners, doing things like dividing a house to enable a live-in carer, or provide a flat to generate rental income, while also bringing the home up to a good standard, coupled with new financial products that make that affordable to people who might have assets as a house but don't have cash to actually do the improvements. And then at the top end of the scale, Blackwood's Peoplehood project is enabling people to live independently with new design for accessible housing. And in this case, I'm going to give Blackwood the chance to explain what they're doing.
For healthy aging, to help people to live an additional healthy 5 years. So we're looking at a model demonstrator house. So this house has got a central bathroom that's a wet floor bathroom.
One of the biggest challenges that wheelchair users face with cooking their own meals in their kitchen is getting access to storage space. So we have made it that the cupboards rise and fall down so they can bring them down to the right height. So this is Clever Cogs, and this is the interface that our customers use. So it lets them interact with us as their housing and care provider, but also lets us deliver some of our services through it.
These houses would be absolutely perfect. You could grow old in them.
It's really, really important for us to test with the people in the neighbourhood what it is that's going to help people live more productively for longer. And that's testing products, services, and creating a model that will allow people in Scotland to thrive as they age.
So that design that they've just sort of showcased in there, sorry, beg your pardon, as I try and move on to the next slide, but that design that you've just seen is going into a new development near Dundee that will be opened, and they aim to occupy this year. So again, just showing actually how fast some things can actually move when there's already some planning in place. And what I really liked about that case study is it's supported by a range of placemaking innovations aimed at fostering a thriving community. And so picking up on that wider placemaking work, I wanted to highlight some of the wider projects that are also opening up new opportunities in later life. So, and you'll have to forgive me because I'll get the pronunciation of this wrong, but Brunafon Community Housing is one of our social venture projects working on senior co-housing communities in the Torfan area. So co-housing is coming up time and again as a really innovative solution that connects generations and is of increasing interest across the UK. Moving again, slightly further on, Inch Architecture is another one of the social ventures and one of a number that is developing ambient assistive technology. So in this project, they're helping social housing landlords manage their assets and empower their customers to live independently. So actually, there's a bit of a connection to the previous speakers in terms of asset management, but as well as looking after people. The next piece, well, not really about specifically housing, is innovation in home care, and has won funding through our investment partnerships to build a network of self-managing teams to support people in later life to thrive at home. So they're using the Boertorg model to bring innovation into essentially social care. So that's Belby. Circadian lighting does sort of what it says in the name. It's not about community, but it is about smart home technology, and they've received funding through our investment partnerships to develop circadian lighting and a healthcare monitoring system linked to that, aimed at improving the lives of people living with dementia, where actually a loss of a sense of time and circadian rhythms is a big issue. And finally, I'm going to highlight Accenture working with Havard Housing, also in Wales, to address social isolation and loneliness with services enabled by technology. And I will give them the word on that too. So here.
In simple terms, the problem is loneliness and isolation. Somebody who's chronically lonely, chronically isolated, that leaves an indelible imprint on their life chances, on their outcomes.
Home care is a patented smart home solution that runs on the Echo Show. They help reinforce routine, help connect them with like-minded individuals, give them something to do, and kind of really create a sort of sense of purpose.
This is something we've co-produced with our customers, so we've listened to what their needs are. This funding has allowed us to take a concept which we've proven to becoming a more mature product, which is ready to take out to market and to scale. The challenges that the social care sector face at the moment are immense, and it's only through innovation that we will find the solutions that we need.
So for me, what was of really particular interest in this project is the proactive warden model that Havard have implemented, and how that draws on the interactions with residents through the voice technology like Amazon Echo. So yes, there's a big tech piece of it, but there's really a big piece about how you deliver the service in practice and deliver results. So so that was a whistle-stop tour to take you through some of the housing innovations coming out of the Healthy Aging Challenge. It's just a flavour. Overall, our housing projects amount to a total investment of around £33 million. That includes the contribution from businesses. And in terms of our budget, about 20% of all of our grant fundings. Apologies to anyone who's received money from us in a housing project that I haven't highlighted you. I hope you get the sense that there's actually quite a lot going on. And you can find out more about some of these projects through our reports, as well as being a member of our community practice. So it's not exclusive being with the HousingLIN. You can join us as well and find out about those broader things. And I'll drop those links in the chat in a moment. So Jeremy, thank you. Back to you.
George, thank you. And yes, we do encourage people to join your community of practice. I think there's we've built up a great synergy between our respective teams, and so I'm really pleased that we can continue that. And we've also, I know, featured some of the projects like Peoplehood and the London Rebuilding Society in our happy hours that we offer in between our annual summits. So we look forward to returning to some of the projects that you've highlighted as they progress as well. But you talked about MMC, you talked around offsite manufacturing, and I'm delighted to introduce Adam Fitzgerald from Dorset Council. I met Adam about a month or so ago at the launch of the Southwest ADAS report on housing and care, and which was undertaken by our consultancy team, highlighting good practice in the region. And one of those was Adam's and his colleagues, who've developed in partnership with both industry and the local community, a really interesting project about a relocatable scheme for people with learning disabilities and people with mental health problems. The case study that came out yesterday. Adam's going to walk us through that, and here he is. So Adam, over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Morning, everyone. My name's Adam Fitzgerald. I'm the programme manager for Dorset Council's Building Better Lives programme. So we're a programme based in our Adults and Housing Directorate, and our focus is on housing with support, which includes increasing the supply that we have in Dorset, but also transforming the systems and the information to make sure that people can access homes of support more easily and efficiently. Red Oak Court is the first housing project that we've completed, and I've been asked to speak to you today just to give a bit of insight into the scheme and how we got it off the ground. Next slide, please. Thank you. So Red Oak Court is a supported living scheme. It's been built by or developed by Dorset Council on land that we own in a town called Wareham, which is a small market town in the southeast of Dorset. At the scheme, there are 18 units of accommodation. We're using 13 of those for a supported living service, and we have an extra unit that is used as a staff office and an overnight sleep-in room. And then we have 4 of the units that are used by our housing service for temporary accommodation. 12 of the properties are configured in a 2-storey terrace, and then we have another 6 that are larger bungalows that are designed for people that need to live in an adapted property. An on-site support provider offers a background support service to the supported living units, and then additional one-to-one support where that's needed and commissioned. And the scheme is supporting a mix of people, some of whom only need a minimal amount of support, and some of whom who've got some quite complex support needs. Most of the people living there have got learning disabilities or mental health issues, but the scheme hasn't been specifically designed to be exclusive to any one particular group of people. What makes Red Oak Court unique, as far as we know, is that it's the only scheme that's entirely constructed from factory-built modular units that can be relocated during their lifetime. So the idea is that they arrived on a lorry, were craned onto site, but that process can be reversed and we can move them to another site in future. So we worked with our operational social work teams to identify that there were a significant number of people particularly with learning disabilities or mental health issues who were likely to need housing and support within a relatively short period of time. And our supply of general needs housing access through the housing register is quite limited or is in high demand and wouldn't suit everybody who was on that list. So coupling the shortage of 1-bedroom self-contained supported living properties with that, and with the fact that much of our existing supported living was in houses of multiple occupation, we started to consider how we could quickly provide an option for some of these people and started to look at modular housing products. The site in Wareham is a brownfield site. As I said before, it's owned by Dorset Council, and it was previously had a middle school on it, which had been closed as part of a move from a 3-tier to 2-tier education system in the area and had been demolished. And it was a good opportunity because we've got long-term development plans for the site, but having a relocatable modular housing product on there can give us the opportunity to make use of the site while long-term plans are being brought forward and sort of all the planning and that side of things is being done. So we've tied the Red Oak Court into the existing services and infrastructure, and they can give people a short-term home while those longer-term plans are brought forward. In terms of its location, surrounded by playing fields, natural green spaces, it's a short walk from the local leisure centre. There's a playground and other amenities like that. And it's about a 10-minute walk from the high street in Wareham. So very close to shops and other opportunities for people. Having them as a relocatable unit also means that we can think again about what the most appropriate use is in future. So at the moment, we have them as a mix of supported living and TA, but that doesn't mean that we have to use that same configuration in future, and there is the potential for them to be split into several different schemes and used on different sites in future. So the fact that we have a certain amount of space on this site doesn't mean that we're always going to need to look for the same amount of space in one location in future. Next slide, please. So like I said, we began looking at various modular housing products. We did look at some that used recycled shipping containers, and we know that they've been used elsewhere to support homelessness need. But we eventually went with a purpose-built unit that has an estimated sort of a functional lifespan of about 60 years, and we procured that through a modular building framework. Dorset Council have put the land in, but we also put the capital into the project to fund it. So that came partially from central capital and partially from an allocation through the housing service in order to get the temporary accommodation in place. We did also make a bid to One Public Estate as part of their Wave 7 funding, and alongside several other bids for projects, including the long-term vision for this site in Wareham. And Red Oak Court was one of the schemes that OPE chose to fund. So as well as delivering their key aims of increasing housing numbers, generating income and creating jobs, I think it appealed to them because of the innovation and the ability of making use of sites to meet immediate housing need while we're thinking about what we do in the future. We did also work closely with NHS colleagues, looking at the potential suitability for use of the accommodation for what was the Transforming Care programme. So I think it's now called the Learning Disability and Autism programme, and that's a fund that NHS England manage and use to try and help increase the supply of accommodation for people in quite a specific group of individuals with learning disabilities or autism. In the end, that didn't come forward, but they have remained quite interested in the potential that modular construction can have in delivering housing for this group of people. So, and they have come out and visited the scheme. So it's an ongoing conversation, really. Units themselves were designed in consultation with social work and occupational therapists at Dorset Council, and then they were all constructed in a factory while the groundworks were undertaken. So on the day of delivery, and you can see from the photos some of the images of them arriving and being craned into place, they all came on a single day. So all 18 units all arrived on a sort of a fleet of articulated lorries and were all connected up. So it went from being a site with groundworks on to a site with 18 units of housing on in essentially a space of a day. They're not large units, it has to be said. The terraced units are 25 metres squared and the larger bungalows are 50 metres squared, but they work for certain groups of people. They do offer more living space and privacy than people are generally getting in rooms in shared houses, and they are functioning as a great starter home for people who need to learn independent living skills and perhaps moving out of the family home for the first time with a view to moving on to something in future. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in summer 2021, Red Oak Court was a year old. It'd been on site for a year and occupied for a year. So it seemed like a good opportunity to take stock and then undertake a lessons learned process on both the construction and the support commissioning, and also to celebrate with the individuals living there about how their life had changed. I think everyone who's visited the scheme or everyone who lives there agrees there's a really nice community feel that has grown there over the time, and that's even in spite of COVID-19 restrictions and people sort of having to stay relatively in their own home and things like that. But people are thriving there, friendships have formed, several people have pets. So if you visited the scheme, there'll be several cats kind of out and about in the area that live in the scheme as well. And people are getting jobs and getting involved in the local community. Next slide, please. So I am probably not the best person to tell you how things are going there. The people who live there and some of the professionals that are more involved in those people's day-to-day lives are better. So as part of the 1-year anniversary, we did make a short video that helps to demonstrate what the scheme is and how things like this can benefit people. So if we could run the video, please.
I think my ambition for Purbeck was to have kind of a core and cluster model for adults with a learning disability. So they have the ability to live independently, but with support on site. So over many years, it's taken us to develop that service, and Dorset Council came up with the idea of the relocatables scheme, and it kind of went from there really. So all of those adults that were on a housing list that we developed and that were urgent needs were prioritised for the housing to enable them to be as independent as possible, with staff on site that they're able to use their assistive technology if they need staff. Some individuals have their own support all the time, and others are able to just call in support when they need it. So most of the individuals that I can see that there's been a huge change have come from home. So they were really keen as adults to have that independence. And we've been able to reduce some of the individual support breakdowns. They've shown an ability to be able to make positive change throughout their home environment. So they've had support to cook meals, to maintain a home environment, and actually starting to do that independently. So there's several individuals where we've reduced the packages of care, which is less restrictive for those people. That's what we want to see. We want to see people being able to do things themselves, feeling more empowered that they can achieve the same as actually what everyone else is entitled to. And that's what this scheme is, we're hoping to achieve. And we're already seeing pockets of evidence of that. Certainly as a couple of ladies that have flourished, don't really see a lot of, and the support is pretty much stopped, you know, and unless it's something that's really changed or they want to try something new, and then they can build in that support again and we can start new challenges. So yeah, it's really nice to see. Do you think it's made a difference? You live in here?
Yeah.
Why do you think it's made a difference?
In my area, I born here.
You were born here?
Right
where and weren't you?
Yeah. I born this area.
You were born in this area, that's right.
Yeah.
Has it made a difference living on your own?
Yeah.
What's good about that?
I do cooking, waking up, working.
It's a bit different.
Is it?
Yeah, it's a bit better.
A bit better.
I can do my own thing, like do my washing, cooking my own things, like cooking and stuff.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And have you made any friends?
Some friends down here, yeah. Where we have a chat now and again and stuff.
Have a chat now and again?
Yeah.
That's nice, isn't it?
Mm.
Do you need to get any help sometimes?
If I like do like letters, applications, a lot of jobs and stuff, and I press that little button thing.
Yeah.
Abby sometimes see me sometimes. She does.
That's really nice. So if you need anything, just push a little button, and then staff will come down.
Yeah.
And have a chat with you and help you out.
Yeah.
Well, it is a good place to live here because, you know, I used to be in school here. So I used to be here and very, very well. So, yeah, I like living being my own, independent, that sort of stuff. And I've got things going on at the moment. Yeah. Do these newsletters and stuff like that. I do every month, and I do some event stuff like organisation, like people like to do things like do a bit of football and that sort of stuff. Yeah, this is part of my boss really doing this event for people enjoy. So
Thank you. Next slide, please. So, like I said, we did a lessons learnt project. Scheme's now been open for well over 2 years, and wanted to really just understand kind of what had gone well and what we could learn from. So, like all housing developments, there's been snagging and defects issues that we needed to resolve, and I think it's fair to say that quite a number of these have arisen because there was no existing tried and tested blueprint to refer to. So we've been figuring things out as we go, and we have learnt some of those lessons the hard way. And I think we've worked through that with our contractors, tried to minimise the impact on residents as much as we can, but it's less than ideal in a supported living service. It's been an interesting pilot, and I think we've learned a lot ourselves going through the scheme of developing this. It's become apparent that modular construction is definitely faster, but it's not necessarily cheaper than traditional methods of construction. And it quickly became clear that while the units won't stay on the site indefinitely, our planning consent requires, in fact, our planning consent does require us to move them eventually. The requirements are no different to those than they would be for a permanent scheme. So things like the visual considerations, the landscaping and external treatments have all had to be up to the standard that would be expected of a scheme that was going to be there perpetually. So that has had impacts on the budget. I think moving forward, if we're thinking about schemes in the future, getting some really good specialist design at an early stage just helps us to make the most of these kind of schemes, and we want to make sure that the environments are just suitable for supporting as wide a range of people as possible. And I think furthermore, the fact that this is quite a unique scheme, it's highlighted the need for us to just have a really clear, well-managed nomination and allocation process, just to make sure that it's the most appropriate environment for the people that are being referred, and that we're setting them up for success. Despite some of those lessons and some of the, finding out things the hard way, I think it's really important to remind ourselves that people do love living here. It's had a really positive impact on their well-being. Families have been incredibly supportive and complimentary about the scheme, and it has won over the neighbours. There were initial concerns about what a temporary housing scheme would look like and how it would fit into the area, but it has become a success in that regard, and people do look on it and think on it very fondly. So I think that's something positive to reflect on, really. Next slide, please. So in terms of what happens next, like I said before, we do have long-term plans for the former middle school site, which is where Red Oak Court is located. We have a project that we're looking to take forward that will develop extra care housing, supported living and some general needs housing, as well as new GP surgery on the site. Red Oak Court just occupies a fairly small part of the overall site. And this has really helped us in showing how, when we're creating new supported living on the site, which can be larger and permanent units, we have a cohort of residents to work with, so we can involve them in the design and co-produce the design around what they would want their houses to look like in future. It does mean that phasing of that new development is really important, because we have this existing group of people living there. We don't want to uproot them and move them out of the area while building is going on. So we need to think carefully about how we can make sure their new homes are constructed, they can see them being built and input into that process, and then move over, freeing up the rest of the site for development. So, and in terms of the units, once we have new housing on the site, the units will obviously need to relocate. So although we're a few years away from that, we really need to just be identifying where the need is the greatest, finding suitable sites, and then thinking about how the units are configured. So like I said before, that might not mean having a terrace of 12 units again in future. It might mean we chop that up into smaller sections and have two smaller sections of 6 or something like that. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you, Adam. A really interesting walk through. Thanks very much for setting out the scene, the personal stories, which I thought were fantastic, the lessons that you've learned, and what next. And we look forward to following that. We've got just under about 7 or 8 minutes for Q&A. We've got a series of questions that have been posted and we've had people who've been lucky enough to visit as well. Red Oak Court. We've got a series of questions from participants. Adam, while you've just spoken, I think there's one that's just come in from Andrew, who said, a question for Adam, were the modules for Red Oak Court delivered fully fitted out, ready to plug in on site?
They were mostly, yeah. So the interior finishes were largely done in the factory, and then they arrived. The external cladding and things like that all had to be fitted afterwards, but they did. You know, they arrived. All the kitchen units were taped up to make sure the drawers didn't fall open and that kind of thing.
Great. I think the majority of questions are actually for Team Faithful and Gould. So, but please, George and Adam, do chip in as well. There's a question from Rose Gilroy. Lovely to have you with us again. And she's sort of looking at how do we persuade older outright homeowners to invest in their homes, stripping out gas central heating in favour of air source, ground source heating and the like. Do we need to lobby government for grant aid? Now, I know that Annabelle talked about elements of grant, but could we just reflect on Rose's question and comments there? How can we sort of encourage people to take more personal responsibility? I think, Peter, you talked about sort of a behaviour change as well. Any reflections from you?
I can start, and maybe Annabelle would jump in as well. So I certainly think there's a lot of different information, and there's a lot of sort of things that are confusing a lot of people around what's the right thing to do. There's a lot of people saying, well, it's expensive, it's disruptive, there isn't enough availability of materials and certain things. And I think for me, a lot of it comes back to just having really clear, strong information. I think government level is an important point, but then having strong sort of communications through organisations like this and other sort of platforms to sort of really help create consistency, to sort of be saying to individuals, there is funding available. I do think more funding needs to be made available, but I also think the funding needs to be logical. We talk about fabric first solutions. You know, if we just go and change everyone's heating, that will have an impact, but we'll be over-speccing a lot of heating. And actually, you know, also we as an organisation, F&G, have had a very large sort of comms plan with some similar platforms that I just showed you, Decarbonomics, about how everyone can look at simple things around changing your temperatures of washing your clothes down from 40 to 30. LED lights in homes, you'll be surprised still how many are not replaced. Heating's obviously a big disruptor, and a lot of houses, I mean, when my house got refurbed a few years ago, I ended up with 2 systems, and it's all very confusing, and I can't get one room to heat up at the same temperature as another room. So again, it's just sort of trying to create simple technology that helps, and I think that those sort of things will help, and a lot of behavioural things. But I do think funding and accessibility to funding, but even when funding is available, not everyone knows how to access it, whether, you know, they're actually going to get it. So again, there is a lot of work to do on those sort of communications and around it. Annabelle, is there anything you want to add?
No, I think that's a great answer. I completely agree with the kind of communications plan. I think just to build on what Peter said there, I think the other thing that we should be asking government for is more certainty around long-term policy. You know, I think that is what ultimately drives that kind of the investment from government, but also private investment from firms around workforce capability, around materials investments, and private investment into innovation, which ultimately should then hopefully drive down the price of some of these innovations. I think behaviour change, exactly as Peter said, is absolutely key. I think the other place that we do definitely need funding available for those, you know, private homeowners. I guess we need the capability, the opportunity and the motivation that sits behind that, and kind of the reasons why that need to be communicated. but we probably also need wider investment into more of that systems perspective. You know, there is a lot that homeowners do need to do, but there's also quite a lot that probably needs to be unlocked from, you know, is hydrogen a solution? You know, can we rely on that? Is that going to come through? If people need loans, for instance, to get the money out, can we make sure that they are available for these kind of solutions? So this kind of wider context of heat networks really need investment as well.
Sue, I don't know if you wanted to say anything there, but can I just bring George in? Because I think one of the highlighted studies that you shared with us, I think it was from a Trailblaze that you touched on, was from the London Rebuilding Societies, and they work very much with green finance to look at repairs and improvements, to look at issues around sustainable as well as dilapidations. Any other work that the work from them and others are relevant?
No, I think they and big finance companies like Legal & General have recognised that very often there's better value in supporting people to improve their home now, rather than see it dilapidated and then actually when you come to sell it, it's not worth as much. So that concept is there. I think what's been excited working with London Rebuilding, and this has not been an easy time in the financial markets either, has been their extent of ambition of trying to improve that offer to not just be about home insulation and roof repair, but actually just thinking about the whole space and how you live it in. But absolutely, there's no point in dividing a house if you're not actually also addressing the energy efficiency and the carbon. I think going back to the question, the other trailblazer was E.ON, where their work is absolutely building on their energy efficiency obligations. Now, they're in a transition from schemes, so I think they're waiting for full confirmation of actually what the new schemes would be and how they will go. But moving from boiler replacements to other forms of heating replacement and things like that. Actually, they are sort of gearing up for that, but that's actually quite a big change in their subcontractor workforce as well. So there are, as well as what Annabelle was talking about, a need for further innovation in what we're doing. There's also a whole bit about market readiness and workforce and things like that going on. I mean, that sounds like a bit of waffle, but I think people are very mindful of it, and the end dates for selling new gas boilers will mean that the replacement question will come up for private homeowners at some stage in the not too distant future.
Yeah, and again, I think both Annabelle and Sue touched on issues around the type of accreditation that our workforce will need to have, the lack of skills in this sector nationally, etc. Look, I'm conscious we're running out of time, but there are two quick questions I'd like to pick up on. One was for Annabelle. You talked about the social housing decarbonisation fund. Can I just quickly ask, is that just for England? Does that also cover Wales or Scotland, and Scotland and Northern Ireland?
That fund's currently just for England.
Right, so again, host nations will have to look at other types of systems in place, okay. And also the other question, which I pick up from somebody who's call themselves anonymous, is about accessibility. And again, it's something that I was thinking about as Peter was talking as well, about whether this retrofitting and adapting properties for climate energy orientation could also be extended to think about the health and well-being and accessibility of that stock in types of models that you're developing.
Yeah, I think that's it's a great question, and I'd say absolutely. We in different sectors, we're also looking at things like health and safety, asbestos, those sorts of things that are present in buildings. And the more you use net zero carbon programs and align them with existing programs, whether it is accessibility, understanding where you've got weak points or investments needed, what interventions they might be, the more you're still starting to go back to that business case and making the actual investment in understanding your estate, what needs to be done, minimizing the disruption for work, saving on costly prelims by doing things 3 times over a period of 6 months. You know, all of that, bringing it together in a really strong sort of program management sort of way, 100% will allow you to get better returns and have better sort of business case for the investment. So I think they're really good suggestions, and we'd absolutely would support any sort of combining those challenges.
Well, look, we've covered a lot. There are two other questions I just quickly want to touch on. I think Brian's question is probably a yes. Should programs be accelerated to deliver the evidence? But also, I think that we've had a question from Philip, about are there long-term returns that pension funds could invest in? I don't know how much liaison you have and partners with pension funds. I know that George has just mentioned LNG. Are there other pension funds and other inward investment in this sector that we can help sort of stimulate to really help nurture and build that market that Sue was talking about, which is quite fragile from what I can see?
So my answer is yes. There are a number of other pension funds looking at this, and we're working with a very large one at the moment. And what we're doing is we're looking at, first of all, understanding the sort of operational carbon they have. They're very interested to understand, as I said earlier, about the EPC impact on that operational carbon, and what they don't want to have is a big capital cost and you hitting the market as leases, or particularly sort of where they might not have as much access into the buildings come back to them, and then they have a large sort of investment to sort of get the properties back to the right EPC rating. But also they're looking at occupancy rates, they're looking at how the market is adapting and what people were prepared to pay for a building that's slightly more, it's more green or more cost efficient from an operational side of things. And those things are all absolutely feeding into their business case. And I think for me, sorry, the last point I was going to say on that was just the fact there's also a bit of tightening coming up after the last COP on making sure we're not greenwashing. So there's more evidence-based requirements. And I think for me, there's definitely the appetite, and there's definitely people wanting to do it. It's just trying to help people understand and identify the opportunities. And I think we're going to see a lot more sort of green revenue supporting councils and private sector sort of supporting these sort of longer term relationships. So I think it's a great question, and there's definitely lots there, I think.
Well, thank you to you. And Sue, do you have any final words that you'd like to share?
Not really, just thank you very much for listening. I hope you found it really interesting, and another great week. Thank you very much, Jeremy and HousingLIN.
Well, thank you to you and the team, Peter, Annabelle, and yourselves, and your colleagues behind the scenes for your support. George, thank you for UKRI and your programme as well. Some fantastic examples. And Adam, very useful to localise this as well and listen to hear how the sort of retrofitting of that space in particular, and your planning arrangements, looking at how to create sustainable homes to achieve greater independence. Really, really great example there. So on behalf of the HousingLIN, can I thank both our sponsors, but also our speakers. A big round of applause to Peter, Annabelle, Sue, Adam and George. Can I also thank the team behind the scenes, Jerome and Sally, for their input and support right throughout this week and also this session. I very much hope that you can join us at our final session at 2:30, but the slides and the recordings from this will be available shortly. Do watch out for an email or social media or LinkedIn, and we'll get the messages out ASAP. And thanks very much for your involvement. Have a good afternoon.